Housing stress is growing. Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian here and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. Grab your stein of coffee. Let's have a look at this article from the ABC. This one discussing the growing housing stress affecting more and more Australians. So, housing stress affecting a growing number of Australians, the survey finds, amid calls for action. Now this bit here is the concern. You've got the CFMEU now calling for a super profit tax to plough money into social housing. Here's the thing. Whenever there's a tax, whenever there's an intervention, whenever there's a tariff, who ends up paying for it? Who in the end ends up bearing the cost of these programs, initiatives, and interventions? It's never the corporations. It's never the government. It's us, one way or another. It's the consumer. It's the tax-paying people. That's what it is. Well, let's have a look. So, housing advocates warn that the nation's housing crisis is getting worse, with a survey of hundreds of renters revealing the majority are now under housing stress. Now, I'm assuming housing stress is when they're spending more than 30% of their income on their housing costs. And generally that 30%, at least according to the ABS, is only for lower income people. Other people have more options. The survey by campaign group, Everybody's Home, so they've got an ideological position, you've got to understand, shows 4 out of 5 renters are spending more than 30% of their income on housing. Experts often use this threshold when considering of housing affordability, particularly for low-income households. Now, here's an interesting thing. This 30%, guys. Imagine if you've been renting, paying 30% of your money as for your rent, and you've managed to save a deposit as well. Maybe you got in during the mania period. You and the missus, you each took out part of your super, and you chucked it together to get a deposit, and you got in. Even with interest rates going up, you still don't have that rent burden anymore. So life may still be better off than it was, struggling to get a deposit together and to get into the market. That's what some people have to realize. I'd argue this generation has had it a bit harder than previous generations to get into housing. So they're going to do everything they can to hold on to it. And maybe they've been toughened a little bit compared to others. Remember, the average Aussie isn't the dimwit that the media portrays. Okay, we're not all so stupid that piss all our superannuation withdrawal money on boob jobs and gambling like the bloody union and super fund written articles portrayed us as. No. You know what most people did with that money? They paid off debt, which I would argue is quite a sensible thing. If you don't, rack up the debt again. I mean, what, 20% on a credit card? Are you getting that every year on your super returns? Anyway, back to this. Rents have been surging for more than a decade, and we're at a point where people can't keep absorbing them. Everybody's Home spokesperson Maya Azizi said, the report called Brutal Reality surveyed more than 700 people. I'd like to see a bit more detail on the survey methodology. I mean, 700 people is, well, it's less than I get on a vote poll for this channel. Are they phone calling them? Are they SMSing them? What's the demographic breakup of the people? Among renters and mortgagees combined, it found 75% of people are scared about their financial security because of the housing crisis. Okay. Now, is that unusual? 75% being scared or concerned? I mean, let me think about this now. Am I worried about the housing crisis? I've got rent that's going up. I've got a mortgage. I've got a construction project underway. I've got a new baby arriving. I wouldn't be scared because I've got adequate buffers. I think that's what it comes down to be quite honest. I would say if once you get into a position in your life when you have an emergency fund, you can run months. If something goes wrong, you can just burn through months of emergency resources there that you're not going to be depending on the Centrelink, you're not going to be depending on charity. That is a stress relief right there. That's what we need to, that's what needs to be encouraged. How can we train younger people to learn about that? I honestly don't think it's not going to happen at school. I think the best chance is probably TikTok or whatever social media that young people engage in, and they just will discover it themselves. I imagine the FIRE movement could be a big part of that too. So, she said some states and territories have tried to limit rent increases, but those measures have not gone far enough. We know that the state and territory housing ministers are meeting with the federal government in August, and we'd like to see the federal government show some leadership there, she said. Not just leave it to them, but actually show some leadership there and ask them for a couple of things. Governments should limit the unfair rent increases, end no-cause eviction, improve rental standards for people. Okay, what's an unfair rent increase? What's fair to one person may be considered unfair to another. What's reasonable one may not be considered reasonable to another. What's a no-cause eviction? If are you breaching the contract? Are you evicting? I mean, honestly, I would argue if you've got a lease agreement, you shouldn't be able to be thrown out until the end of that agreement. Improve rental standards for people. What I would like to see, well, my issue with this is you've got them implementing all of these rental standards and requirements. But then you've also got councils heritage listing all these buildings, and then they can ignore the rental requirements. So it's kind of bullshit in a way. But you don't want to be imposing more costs on landlords. All of those things came through in our survey, and all of those things are places where the federal government is missing in action. The report also, well, it's more a state issue, isn't it? The report also stated 2/3 of renters said the accommodation crisis was affecting their mental health. Ms. Azizi criticised the federal government's Housing Australia Future Fund, saying it would provide a fraction of the housing needed. Yeah, it's not gonna do anything. We're talking 200 at a minimum. They've guaranteed 200 houses a month per state, which, considering we've got about 10,000 approvals a month, it's nothing. Absolutely nothing, everyone. It's not going to meet the difference. Housing Minister Julie Collins provided a statement saying the Housing Australia Future Fund would make a difference. She also said the government's new $2 billion social housing accelerator would help deliver thousands of new homes across Australia. I mean, why is this constant focus on social housing, social housing? Do we want the government to own housing, or do we want to have more individuals owning housing? I would argue it would be better for the country, better for the future, if we had a nation of home owners, of individuals owning houses. But maybe that will shift too many people into a conservative mindset, since they have something of value and have accumulated some significant assets. Maybe that's what they don't want. They want everyone in social housing. Here's the thing. Where's the criticism of local authorities that make it very difficult and onerous to get something built? All the costs, all the red tapes. Where's the criticism of the additional changes and requirements that are imposed year upon year on housing stock? You look at a house in the 80s, the requirements to build there compared to now. Those are, it may sound good, all of these newfangled, energy efficient, accessibility requirements, but they're all adding costs. It all adds up. We have to ask, do we want affordable housing, cheap to build, easy to get out there, or do we want to meet these other requirements? And as a nation, we have decided we want to meet, certain energy efficiency requirements. So you need to get reports and paperwork done to prove that your house, and modeling done to prove that your house meets a certain energy performance requirement. Now, you may think, okay, that's a couple of $1,000s for each house. But when you're talking for a little house that's got, a build of 200 grand perhaps, that's a decent percentage of the build. I remember at university I was looking at the payback period of putting insulation in a house. And the payback period, where the amount of money that you would save compared to the cost of installing this requirement, was longer than the house. So that's from a financial perspective. But people will make an argument based on an environmental and carbon emission perspective. But even that doesn't add up when you look on a global scale. But that's irrelevant because these are the decisions that we've made here in Australia. So when people talk about housing affordability, I feel like it's all lip service. This is why people are going towards tiny houses. Not because, well, they love them, but because you can get around all the rules in the building code. Typically, anyway, we'll go back to this. Rentals spreading into regional areas. While there's been plenty of discussion around soaring rent prices in major cities, Carol Godwin from Anglicare Central Queensland says the crisis is also hitting hard in regional areas. Typically, they're a fairly resourceful bunch, she said. They've been able to source alternatives even when things are tough. Now they can't. There's nothing there to assist families and individuals. She acknowledged governments were working on the problem, but said with fewer than 500 new social housing projects delivered in Queensland in the past financial years, things were not moving fast enough. You can't expect the government to solve this issue by themselves. We need government and private industry. What we really need is federal, state, and local authorities working together with private industry to look at smart ways to get housing built. That's what we need to do. We need to cut the red tape in half. Maybe we should get a catalogue of 20 designs done, typical, bog standard, one volumetric module on the back of a truck that people could use as a starter house that you can build, put on any site in the state. This is the thing, we need to get statewide planning. It shouldn't be every little council. It adds so much complexity. Should look at what Japan is doing. But anyway, that's going to be... The problem is no one wants to give up their power, do they? In the next 10 years, we need 11,000 properties each year. And if you're not even getting 500 in the social housing space, they're not going to be able to break the back of this housing crisis, she said. I don't think we will. Sadly. I don't think we will. And remember, this is all demand for housing. So housing stress is hitting owners too. It's not only renters who are under stress. The Reserve Bank says mortgagees are increasingly under pressure. The minutes from its most recent meeting noted that as borrowers with fixed-rate loans rolled off those and went on to higher variable rates, housing stress would grow. Research from the ANU's Centre for Social Research and Methods shows mortgage borrowers are facing the highest housing costs relative to income since at least 1984. We're going back to the 80s, everyone. We're going back to the 80s. It's also found Australians with mortgages had seen a 47% increase in their housing costs relative to their income compared to before the pandemic. So there we go. So let's have a chat about this one, guys. I mean, it's a challenging situation. We've got a housing crisis in this country, which is not going to end anytime soon, particularly in Queensland. How can we get state, local, and federal government to work together? At least, that's what Labor is trying to do. On some regards, they're having dialogues across these three levels. People are aware of this. It's not going to be an easy change. But we need to stop this attack on landlords. We need to stop this attack and criticism of property investors. To get housing more affordable, we need to increase supply, significantly increase supply. And that's not going to be an easy thing to do. Addressing immigration into the country, perhaps reducing it. There's too many powerful lobbying groups that depend on it. They're not going to do it. Labor and Liberal won't even discuss it on a public platform. And any discussions of it is criticised. I can't see that being impacted. So what can you do if you're suffering from housing stress, guys? You tell me, actually, ask me. I don't have a solution. I'm throwing ideas out there. So perhaps you could share your ideas as well. Thank you all for watching. Check out HeiseBim or Heise Does if you enjoy my content. And if you want to support the channel, you can on YouTube or Patreon. Use our referral links, buy our pocket squares, or call us if you need an architect. Take care, have a great day, and I'll see you all in the next episode of HeiseSays. Bye for now.